was.
I think it was either in one of these FinCom budget meetings, or it might have been a town meeting. But
And who made that representation?
I believe it was the administration, but
Superintendent.
superintendent, yeah.
It may have been 10 years.
Well, and
No,
even
I think
subsequent
it
to
was
that,
like
when they had a capital plan to put in, top of the line boilers in Peabody and Sanborn, it was in the context of that we would be living in those buildings for,
Yes.
yeah, and it was like can't remember precisely, but it was on the order of like 15 to 20 years. And within a couple of years of that project being funded and completed, we were being told that these were unlivable facilities and needed
Yes, right.
immediate replacement. And I'm not aware of any acts of God that dramatically changed those buildings. And so some of this, there's a track record of that this is all puzzling.
Well, we were also told, I think it was only 2 years ago, that there's plenty of parking at the high school, more spaces than there were at the prior high school.
Okay, so this is.
All right.
But
Anyway, I think-
that was when we wanted to justify not putting any buses at the high school, so at the time, there was plenty of parking. Now,
Right.
So I think that concludes my observation of the school committee was that set of, they voted in that set of warrant articles. So,
I would just say one thing about the parking. There was uncertainty at the meeting about the $2 million cost. It was, questions were raised about whether that included an architect engineering fee and a contingency fee, and nobody knew, but it could be 25% less. The contingency fee was 15%, contingency amount was 15%, and the architect was 10%. But it wasn't clear whether that was included in the estimate from the consultants or not. So it could be 1.5 million.
right, and in real time, they were doing some calculations that there was some alarm raised about how expensive this parking was. $7,000 a space was one of the rough cut numbers, if I recall. So, am I misquoting that, Bob? I think that was Wally was on the case. Yep.
Carl? Any observer report?
No.
Okay.
Just one quick item at the DPW meeting. They were unanimously and strongly against one of the warrant articles that they're going to place conservation restrictions on the landfill.
Are they going to sell them to Walden Woods or some kind of arrangement with Walden Woods?
Walden Woods wants to put a lot of very strong conservation restrictions on the old landfill, and DPW is saying, no, that is a really bad idea for the town, because it's the one very flexible space they have to do stuff. And once you lose that, they don't know where there's a similar place in the town that they can replace.
Do they cart snow over there and things like that? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Christmas trees.
Okay.
That's it.
Andrea? Okay.
I was at yesterday's school budget subcommittee meeting, and on the heels of the voting through the two budgets, it was largely a housekeeping meeting. But one thing that was of interest that we might want to invite them to come back and speak to us about is that in some years they prepay some of the following years out of district special education placements, and that understanding in any given year how much was prepaid and what the, I was not aware that we were doing that.
Seems a little unusual.
It's completely within their purview to do it, but understanding how that might lead to lumpiness and looking year to year at changes in what they're asking for in special education budget, that, but having a robust conversation around in any given year, what would be, if we paid it all that year, what's the run rate that we're at on special education, and then when we're looking at savings or not savings, is that on the prepaid number or the run rate number that, we're thrilled with what Jared and Lori have done, and that this is another area where going forward, we can maybe get some more clarity on, how they, if they have available funds at the end of the year, that this is how they're using them, it protects that budget line item. But, I think it's another area that we can get greater clarity in, and that I don't want to take away from any of the work that they did to heroically streamline things, but that was an interesting topic, and I think that would be great for them to educate us about that and talk to us about it as we talk about the numbers.
So Minuteman, at the last meeting, they talked about budget, and so it looks like they finalized their budget, and it appeared to be close to what we heard about when we were here. So things like much was shifting. The big drivers in their budget continue to be salaries, not unlike what we would see in schools. So 3% is what they're budgeting for salary increases for teachers, and debt service because of the new building. Those are the big drivers, and they're still working pretty hard, actually, on figuring out this out-of-district tuition. So we know there's a formula in place for how towns that are in district, if you will, folks who are signed up for Minuteman are paying, and that's around, ends up with debt service sitting around 30 grand a kid, somewhere around that. So they're, as part of this, part of their agreement and with the withdrawal, those 6 towns, they really have to figure out what they're going to charge for out-of-district students. Right now, there's a gap. So the way the math works, the way the contracts read, it's like they only pay about 20. So there are 100 out-of-district students, so it's about $1 million worth of a gap. So they're working on that pretty hard, figuring out how do they close that gap. So they want to make it fair for everybody.
Is that caused by like legislative constraints? Like they can only charge so much?
That's
or so-
correct.
That's what I thought, yeah.
It's DC, so
Yeah.
the Department of, whatever it is.
DESE. Department of Education of Elementary and Secondary Education.
That's it. So
DESE.
they have some rules.
Yeah.
So they're working with DESE to figure out how do they reconcile that difference. So that's the big thing they're working on. And the second thing is enrollment. So those are things they talked about here. So they have a
Mhm.
specific subcommittee that's working on that. So that's a lot of what their discussion is.
Where do you have to go? Where are those meetings?
They're at the school.
At the school? Okay. Mr. Hickling, do you have any?
Mr. Turpin, you covered the select board meetings substantially that I attended. I would just add that I did not detect tremendous amounts of support for our fiscal sustainability and our SGR efforts based on some of the comments that were made at the select board, which I found mildly disappointing. You also covered the school committee meeting. Little different from the discussion that I expected from an entity that is facing a credit watch negative downgrade, and on the precipice of a big ask for a middle school.
They're different. The
They're
CPS
different.
is not,
Does the
CPS.
taxpayer care which town entity incurs the debt on their behalf? I don't think so. I
Well,
said it, this was different from my expectations. So I'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough.
Ms. Hanson? Okay,
All
all right. All right, so much for observer reports. Finance Director's report. Anything to report?
Just one thing. Free cash. We're getting ready to submit our free cash to be certified, and what we believe we have is $11,613,000. That would represent about 11.25%
Could
of
you
the
pull your mic a little closer, Carrie?
The free cash estimate that we are going to submit is $11,613,000. It is about 11.25% of the prior year budget, which is what we use as our benchmark. So that would mean that we are about 1.29 million over the 10% policy, but you plan to use $1 million in the fiscal 20 budget. So that means we will be about 292,000 over the 10%. This is all subject to certification by the Department of Revenue, but that's what we expect to have certified.
Given the posture of the school system, I think we should be looking at creating a debt stabilization fund for the future. middle school. At some point.
That's it.
Thank you. I would, in line with the finance director's report, direct you to this graph that we briefly looked at in one of our earlier discussions, and just commend it to you for your review, and might want to just look it over for future discussion. This was prepared by the finance department at my request. Given the recent, in the current, in the 2020 fiscal year budget proposed by the town manager, we're increasing the census of full-time employees by a little over 3%. So I think it's important to look at what's behind these levels and what's driving them. And I haven't had a chance to look over this in detail, but I'm curious to see how the ratio between town population and full-time employees has changed over time, so, among other things.
Was this one to get at the location thing as well, Tom? Where they live, or is that a different?
No, that's a different question, and I'm hoping that we are now collecting those data, but I've never received any formal confirmation of that.
We are now collecting that data, but we don't believe we have accurate data going back for any period of time. So I think that was one of the questions that initially the hope was to, at least over a 10-year period to have that data, have it been tracked. But it's not something we had been tracking, and in speaking with the HR department, it didn't seem like it would be easy to pull that together, but we're definitely tracking it going forward.
I wonder if it would be useful to circulate a questionnaire among the town's employees and ask them to provide those data going back years. Where have you lived over the years? Or just yes or no, are you a resident of the town? In how many years have you worked for the town? Just a thought.
Okay.
Okay, so it wasn't that, so what should we be looking for when we look at this? Is it meant to sort of say, is the growth in the population
The last
consistent with
sentence
the
at the
growth?
bottom, I think it's this line, just note at the very bottom.
Okay.
This is my takeaway.
And this is-
The population grew over the 11-year period by, I beg your pardon, the FTEs grew by almost 15% over the period, the population grew at almost 10%. That's the conclusion, I think.
Okay.
Okay. Citizen comments? No. All right. Well, it now being 9:04, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please leave.